Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 75 of the ITSM crowd. We've got a little bit of an extravaganza this week. We've got 5 ITSM crowd episodes across 2 days, and then we've also got a couple more coming in November that are all structured around a new publication called the Jigsaw Organisation. So the Jigsaw Organisation is something that I started working on towards the end of lockdown and as the COVID situation kind of settled a little bit, I think. And really the aim for it was to say, look, we've all broken our organisation into tiny pieces. Now let's think about how we put it back together in a better way. You know, how do we make sure that we actually learn some lessons, find some improvements, take advantage of some of the changes in the way that we work. So I reached out to some of the finest minds in, it's not even service management, it's IT management, it's consultancy, the best practitioners from around the world. And lots of them very, very generously contributed some advice, some guidance, some thoughts, which went into the Jigsaw organisation. So the first thing is, where can you get it? So you can download the Jigsaw organisation for free from the Scopism website. I would really recommend you do that. Lots and lots of different articles in there. And through this week, we're going to be joined by various different contributors from the publication who are going to just talk a little bit more about what they suggested in the publication. So you can see here the dates and the times for the episodes that are happening this week. And then we've got a couple more that are coming in November as well. So do keep an eye out for those. So the first thing I'm going to do is ask our guests to introduce themselves and just give a little bit of a summary about their contribution to the Jigsaw organisation. So Barry, if I can start with you, please.
Thank you very much, Claire. Yeah, you said you asked the finest minds around the world, and they weren't available, so you got me instead. Barry Corliss, I'm an independent consultant. I contributed something around teamwork in a new normal. I've just finished a contract with an organisation called Visionable, who do a solution around digital healthcare. And I spent a 4-month contract working with that organisation, never actually physically met one person from that organisation or stepped on their site. And that 4 months taught me a lot about building, about building team and about management. So that's what I wrote about in the organisation, the stuff that we've done with Claire.
Thank you very much. And Michelle and Simon, you co-authored, so I'll let you both introduce yourselves together.
Okay, I'll kick off. So Michelle Major Goldsmith, Kinetic IT, based in Western Australia. We're in a very fortunate position where we haven't been massively impacted, touch wood, by the challenges associated with COVID at this stage. However, I would mirror what Barry said in terms of it has been absolutely a learning experience as an organisation. We've actually taken on support for a couple of organisations through that period. And so again, even though we weren't massively impacted, we observed the rules and the good sense around sort of trying to make sure that we protected ourselves and others. And interestingly, that's not what we wrote within the Jigsaw organisation. So our focus was very much about SIAM specifically, for obvious reasons. But I'll let Simon maybe talk a little bit about that so I don't steal all the thunder.
That's all right. I just got to unmute there. Michelle normally steals the thunder. So yeah, Simon Dawes, also with Kinetic IT in Perth, Western Australia. Interesting times. So as a service provider, Kinetic IT, Qantas is one of our customers, and you can imagine what life did for them when COVID hit and how it is still only just starting to scrabble back. We were in the middle of 2 transitions of new customers where things had to change completely from what was previously agreed. And just ourselves doing our training, we've always prided ourselves on classroom training to have that face-to-face interaction and added value. And of course, that was no longer feasible. So we had to pivot and change the way we do training. The Jigsaw article is more specific around SIAM, and it's bringing some of the pitfalls, some of the good and bad examples that we've seen over the years, and some of those are, of course, from before COVID. But I do find that people are realizing things now that they really should have been realizing a couple of years ago, but suddenly they've been faced with this challenge, and I think some of these things find a more fertile ground at the moment for people to listen to.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think that's probably where maybe I want to start with all three of you, is this idea of the change in how we work, and specifically thinking about communication and collaboration. You know, Barry, you mentioned working with a new team that you never had the opportunity to meet face to face. Simon and Michelle, that move away from classroom training, and also from a SIAM perspective, that does rely very heavily on communication. So what have been kind of the key points and the key lessons around communication and collaboration? And maybe, you know, Barry, you could kick us off there.
Yeah, I think that the things that I found, probably two or three things. Number one, I think you've got to be relaxed in the environment. So, you know, the variety of different T-shirts, children, dogs, cats, unicorns, you name it, they've kind of all turned up in the communication when we've been doing the one-to-ones using different tools. Be relaxed, be open, be honest. I think inviting people to contribute is important, because people will just stay silent. It takes a lot, I think, for people sometimes to go on video as well. You know, not to worry about. Normally, you see them in work and they've got their business gear on. You don't need to wear it. You know, be comfortable, be relaxed. Getting people to contribute. I think one of the things I would say particularly is be careful about recording meetings as well. You know, certainly asking everybody, making sure that you've got their permission. I'm a chair of governors of a local school, and we record a lot of our meetings there that we do virtually. We've only just started doing them virtually in the last 6 to 9 months because of what's happened. And we need to be very, very careful, let people understand that it is being recorded. And I think also be wary of mixed meetings where you've got people in one, 2 or 3 people in one location who are, of course, socially distanced, and then people in their homes and so on. They can be very difficult to manage as well. I would prefer everybody in, obviously everybody in one room, old style, but everybody virtual as well, even if they're in the same building. Just go to a different part. It's just easier to manage that type of meeting than maybe having a couple of people sort of sat across from each other in an office and trying to do it that way, or in a meeting room.
And just while we're mentioning communication and collaboration, for those of you that are watching live, you can ask questions of our guests today using the YouTube comments. They will pop up here and we can address them. So if you've got anything specific that you'd like to ask Barry, Michelle and Simon, just pop that into the YouTube comments. So Simon and Michelle, then coming to you, how have you found that communication and collaboration have changed?
I think the importance, like I said, people should have realized it was important, but people kind of have always stuck to doing their processes, using their tools and things like that. And so now all of a sudden, one CEO mentioned the rules no longer apply. The way we used to work didn't work. And all of a sudden we had to communicate to other parties differently, and we had to collaborate more to achieve the results in there. So just last night, Michelle and I were at a German special interest group, and someone mentioned there that we shouldn't get hung up on following a specific practice or nitty-gritty detail in there. It's much more about understanding what we are trying to achieve. And that is, of course, already in a lot of these practices. So from our point of view, organizational change management, people practices have been described in the SIAM body of knowledge. And we've always said you need to create models that don't define what you actually do, but how you interact with other parties, when to escalate, when to notify in there. And I think that's something we see, because we got physically removed. we had to communicate, and we had to bring that communication down to, okay, when do we communicate, what do we communicate, and how do we communicate? And now that we're going back in those mixed modes, it's an interesting challenge there. So yeah, we've suddenly realized that we need to be more flexible and more goal orientated with our communication and collaboration.
Yeah, I think that you both made really good points. One of the things I've found really interesting is I've been doing a piece of work for a brand new customer, and it involved working with people I'd never actually met before, so mostly on the customer side. And it was quite interesting because I always used to sort of coin the phrase that you needed really to look into the whites of somebody's eyes. So going back to what Barry was saying before about how he enjoys having that sort of face-to-face relationship and being able to see people. And when that dynamic is undone, you sort of have to find a new reality. And one of the things I found really quite interesting, and Barry alluded to the fact that, with the conference calls and things, is that a lot of people gradually started to put their guard down, and there was a lot more transparency, there was a lot more honesty. We had a lot more fun, I think, in some regards, with some of the daft things that happened. When you were talking to people and meeting for them for the first time, and I've actually felt it was a real benefit having people. I don't want to use the term vulnerable, but in a more vulnerable situation than they might normally be if you were doing that first engagement with them face to face. So it's definitely an important thing, and it's one that, from a leadership and management point of view, we've been talking about for years and years, about being transparent and open and honest and those kind of things. But I think generally that was something that was propagated amongst people that I was working with at all levels, and I found that really, really quite useful.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things with the Jigsaw organisation was this concept of embedding these new ways of working. So rather than just, I think initially a lot of us thought, well, we just have to do this for 3 months and then everything will go back to normal. And it's become more apparent that, this is something that we're in for the long term, but also two, actually we are doing pretty well, and there's some good things here, and there's some things that people are enjoying. And for me, one of the big differences is and this is, from someone who's been working in a virtual team for 10 years, who's been selling e-learning for 13 years. I've always found it interesting when people say, no, it has to be face-to-face. You can't replace face-to-face. It's the only way that things get done. Do you now feel that virtual communication could actually be as good as face-to-face, replace face-to-face communication? Can we carry on like this, do you think?
I believe that we've seen an aspect. People are far more accepting of it now, that would the same people who've had 150 virtual meetings in the last 3 months, would those same people, they'd have taken 3 years to maybe have that amount of meetings in reality, and maybe even longer. So I think now that people are more aware of the alternative, as opposed to it being something sort of very scary, that they're and they can now make an informed choice because they've had a period where they've been embedded in both. I don't think the face-to-face will go away, and I think we'll genuinely enjoy it when we get it back. Just be able to shake hands with somebody again will be a real pleasure. But yeah, I think people do know now what these meetings, how these meetings work, how the dynamic works, and they've become more accepting of it.
I'm somewhat on the fence, because I think we've proven that we can do the job at hand through the virtual meetings and virtual teams, etc., etc. But there is an element of a physical meeting in the social aspect that is often missing in these virtual meetings. I've always said, which is why we like classroom training, the stuff that happens during the breaks where candidates talk to each other, learn from each other's organizations. That is almost as valuable as what Michelle and I are talking about. Almost, not quite there. And similar things happen in virtual teams. So we need to make an effort, both as participants and managers, to bring those social aspects into the virtual format. And so my wife, for instance, certainly during the first couple of weeks, and I think they're still doing it, every week they had a photo assignment. Each team member had to make a photo during the week of, first it was their remote place, the view out the window, the animal that they had in there, but just something to have like a bit of an icebreaker and get that social aspect going. Because I think, yes, we can do the business virtually, but it does sometimes tend to be just the business and then click off and join another meeting, et cetera, et cetera. We don't kind of have that social aspect. We need to make an effort to bring that back in, or in any shape or form.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, I remember, Simon, that we had a birthday party for you virtually, where we all ate cake in our separate locations. Yeah. So we have done it before.
Yeah, I've heard of toasty mornings, dress up things in there. It's just stuff. Some of that happens in physically as well. Some of it was done, but it's just to get people together outside of, okay, this is the agenda. We're talking about these things. Okay, we've got 3 minutes left. Any other questions? Stuff like that. Michelle and I on the virtual training make an effort to get a bit of fun happening normally in the chat, just kind of to get slightly away from the topic. So it can be done, absolutely. It is the new normal, some mix in there. But that's one of the elements, that social aspect, that I think is the hardest one to reintroduce or maintain.
I think I must be unique, Simon. I've had 2 virtual leaving dues since the start of this year. So sitting there drinking cider on your own in your office it's a weird feeling.
I thought that was called Friday night, but
oh dear.
See, as we switch to virtual working, then does that create different challenges for managers? Does it require different management styles? You know, Barry, you kind of got into this bit in your article, and you know, Simon and Michelle, you're always meeting new groups of people through the training, which has that management element of bringing the group together. What have you had to do differently?
I mean, from a management perspective, I've got a kind of 3 A's rule: be approachable. Particularly picking up on what Simon said about the social side of things. The new support team. One of the guys, like myself, was very and the British have got this preoccupation with talking about the weather, and one of the other guys was very, very knowledgeable about it. So we took it to another level. I used to work for the Met Office, so we took talking about the weather to another level. You know, we're talking about lifting potential and whether there was likely to be any electrical activity, cloud to ground lightning, and everybody else on the calls just looking and thinking, what are these guys talking about? So yeah, be approachable, always be there to it's kind of like a virtual open plan office. Be accurate. I think you've got to be accurate, telling people what you want them to do, because you can't just go around and look over the shoulder and reinforce it as easily as you could in an open plan office. And I think be accepting as well, as my 3rd A. People have got new ways of working, and some people are better at it than others. You know, some people, and Simon and Michelle, you must certainly have noticed with the training that some people just get into virtual training much quicker, whether it be an instructor or a student, than others do. And you know, you suddenly find 3/4 of the way through my slides of today, and it's only 11 o'clock. What's going on? Because nobody's said anything.
Yeah, it's a good point, Barry. And I think one of the things I found really interesting, above and beyond the whole, you know, the social aspects and the communication aspects, I think leaders have had to make some really quick and different types of decisions. So when I look at some of the things that I've achieved, and certainly, you know, my organisation has achieved, which would have normally taken a long time to get approval of a business case and all kinds of meetings, and suddenly things were just being done. And, you know, I think a few people have coined the phrase, don't let a good crisis go to waste. In other words, we've learned so much. We've been able to demonstrate a degree of agility within certain controls. And we've seen things happen in a much more fluid way. And it would be a real terrible change if that style went back to normal, whatever that is, and those sort of more traditional approaches to sort of leadership and command and control and all those kind of things became, back to where they were before. For me, that would be a real shame.
Look, again, I think this is something we knew, and organizations that I've worked more had that trust. Working from home wasn't an issue in general. Now some organizations were forced to do this, and I think that's the thing. There were still managers that kind of like to keep an eye on their staff and look over their shoulder and things like that. And that, of course, is hard to do virtually unless you really start breaching privacy things in there. So this is where the management style needs to change, and organization needs to change, where we have clearer outcomes, and it kind of doesn't matter how you get there. There was homeschooling. There were people that working between the hours of 5 and 9 then would look after their kids until 3 in the afternoon, do a couple more hours before before dinner, and then maybe 1 or 2 hours in the evening, and still got all the work done. It's a great commitment. You've got to ask about whether that is long-term in there. But the management style is quite different for that. You don't really say, okay, this needs to be done by 10 o'clock, and those kind of things in there. And that should have been done ages ago, outcome-based thinking and outcome-based management in there. I think for some organizations, that was just accelerated a little bit.
Yeah, and I think one of the big shocks for a lot of organizations, and this is something that Simon and Michelle, you addressed quite specifically in your article, is the sudden realization that we've also taken our supply chains for granted, and we've not really thought about what could happen if our supply chain was disrupted. So, for example, my organization has a help desk in Macedonia, and we were very lucky because within Macedonia there is the infrastructure for the staff to work from home, and there was very little interruption to the service, whereas our business bank had outsourced a lot of their call center function to India. And when those staff were required to work from home, the infrastructure wasn't there, and the disruption was quite significant. And one of the things I think that's been quite interesting to see, I guess. So I had to ring my credit card company yesterday, and 6 months on, we're still getting the recorded message to say, in these difficult times, we're getting slightly more calls than we expected. And you think, well, we should have adjusted to this by now. So I think, Simon and Michelle, to come to you first, what has this maybe taught organizations about the supply chains and the value that's within them?
I think the starting point that the contract is probably worth slightly less than the paper that it's written on. Maybe not quite there, but I told you Qantas is one of our customers, so they had to put 80% of their staff in all kinds of leaves in there. And as a service provider, you can't just say, hey, but we've got a contract, so you still got to pay us every time. Or you can probably say it, but I'm not sure how far that's going to go in there. Other places, we were in the middle of a transition. Organization didn't have a working from home solution, and together with the incumbent provider and the customer, we put a Microsoft Teams solution in 2 weeks. And I think that we've been talking about that for quite a long time in there. So it is really important that in your supply chain, you have highlighted kind of your trusted suppliers where you can really collaborate with. And it's not about squeezing these suppliers at that point in time. It's hard for everyone, but it's about finding solutions that do create the win-win, which is a bit of a term in there, but do collaborate to a true outcome. And you're going to find that some suppliers, maybe because you're beating them down on the contract, you've been squeezing them for a while, are not that likely to do it. Other ones are maybe more interested in that long term. So yes, selection of suppliers, the structure of the agreements and contracts that you have, management of the supplier rather than management of the contract, those things really come to fruition when the chips are down or when the rules no longer apply or dare I say it, in unprecedented times. So going forward, I think once you've gone through this, hopefully you're in a much better position to do it again. And maybe not because you have to, because of pandemic, but because there is an opportunity to do something. So that's what Michelle said, don't let a good crisis go to waste. I really hope that people now putting some structures in place for the next time they need to make a big change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the interesting things we talked about in the Jigsaw article was the idea of trust-based management, which, as Simon said, has very much come to the fore. And I think many organisations were quite clear about providers that they trusted. But, you know, we're also finding that they've had to engage providers that they might not have previously had a relationship with. And there's had to be, you know, the creation of a new relationship and some goodwill involved in many situations. And, you know, I think there's very much been a feeling, look, we're all in this together. And, you know, we've always talked about win-win, haven't we? As being the key to success between a customer and service provider. But absolutely, I've seen some really stellar examples of where providers have stepped into the breach and with massive risks, really, potentially, and just done the best that they possibly can for the customer. So I think hopefully we've learned some amazing things from this, and we can think a little bit more about how we, as Simon said, think less about contractual commitments and more about checking the temperature of the relationship we have with service providers all the time and flexing that so that we're managing under a trust-based agreement and not just looking at the letter of the law within the contract. It's a huge shift in thinking, but I think right now is a great opportunity for people to see that a new way of working has worked, and there's got to be more trust established going forward to get the kind of successes that we've seen from the crisis.
I think from my perspective, the key to any supply chain is, and I think, Simon, you've mentioned it at least 2 or 3 times as I've been listening. You've talked about outcomes, you've talked about goal orientated, and so on and so forth, which is massively important. And then people being able to prioritize those outcomes and thinking about, okay, what do we need to do to make this happen, such as suddenly the whole organization goes to home work. I've done some work recently, an audit with Manchester Shared Services, part of the NHS, and one of their customers commented that they'd managed to do 3 years digital transformation in 3 months, which I think it probably sums up a lot of organizations. And when they look back and think, wow, just look what we did in terms of this in such a short time. And the point about trust as well is massively important. I walked into a situation with a Visionable where I had a support team that I needed to trust very, very quickly. And these were people who I'd never met and didn't know anything about how they worked. And all I'd heard was hearsay about what other people had said about them. You have to make your mind up very, very quickly if that trust-based is going to work, and you don't fall back into a command and control and having cameras on people 24/7. But keep the end in mind. Always very, very important.
Thank you very much. So we're coming up to the end of our time now, but I would just remind everybody who's watching that if you want to read the full content, the full contributions from Barry and from Simon and Michelle, then you can get the free copy of the Jigsaw organisation there. And on the same site, there's a lot of other free content like the Scion Body of Knowledge that Simon and Michelle have been lead architects on as well. So, but definitely would recommend that you download the Jigsaw organisation. And Simon has also shared a LinkedIn article. If you want to just very quickly tell us what that's about, Simon.
Well, it says high velocity in uncertain times. So it's actually talking about the fact that we are suddenly willing to focus on the outcome, look at the win-win, we're in this together, and take some risks that previously would have been discussed for 2 years without any decision. And now 2 months or 2 weeks, it's done in there. So it is kind of telling about those things and how we now need to take that forward to make it structural rather than just happening because we have to.
Thank you very much. And we'll put the link to that underneath the YouTube video for this session as well. So if you do miss it or you want to copy and paste it rather than typing it, you can get it there. So just a reminder that we have another episode today at 11 a.m. BST, which is with Helen Morris, and we are going to be talking about new management styles, looking after the mental health of your people, understanding the diversity in your teams and how you manage that. And then at 5 o'clock, I'm going to be joined by Simone Moore and Patty Blackstaff, and we're going to be talking about the leadership differences that we've seen during this situation. So I would just like to say thank you so much for joining us. So to Barry, to Michelle,
Thank
to
you,
Simon, really appreciate you coming on and talking a little bit more about the Jigsaw articles. So thank you very much. And for everybody else, I will see you on the next episode of the ITSM Crowd. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Claire.